Hi, I'm Jacqueline.
And I'm Courtney, and this is Caffeinated Crimes.
Happy officially fall as you guys are listening to this because fall starts in like 2 days as of this
hmm
recording. So like 4 days ago as of the day this comes out. So, is it already fall-y like where you guys are, or is it still like hot as shit, or is it like almost winter? Are you in like one of those
hmm
states where like you're expecting snow soon, you know?
That's true. I also looked at my calendar that's above me, and 2 days ago was Yom Kippur. So if you celebrate that, happy belated Yom Kippur.
Yes, absolutely. Today is also, as of this recording, Talk Like a Pirate Day. And the reason I knew this like way back at some point in time, but like I didn't remember it in my brain. But the reason I was reminded of it today was because I was on the phone with a preschool teacher and like she has a childcare program in her home, and so she's like, feeding the kids and talking to me on the phone and doing all the things at once. And I just hear her go, now guys, pirates don't talk while they're eating lunch because they are just so hungry by the time they sit down to their food that they just eat it all and don't talk. And so,
That is such a polite way of saying, shut the fuck up. Like,
I'm like
oh,
cracking up, and then she comes back on the phone. She's like, I'm sorry, it's Talk Like a Pirate Day. And I was like, oh yeah, that is today.
that is today. Our matey. What if I talked like that for this entire episode? I
Oh,
would
that's
drive
not what we
myself
were doing.
insane.
I thought that was the plan. Oh shit. I'm gonna have to redo everything then.
Just
um,
scrap it.
well, it is gonna be a little bit of a longer episode. It's already pretty late because it has been a very, very long day here. There's been a lot of stuff happening. But I know Courtney has a couple of updates, and then I also wanted to talk a little bit about how this one came to be. And also, if you didn't see from the title, it is a two-parter. So if you are
hmm
someone who likes to listen to both parts at once, part two will be here next week.
Yep. And so I have two updates. One, they're both kind of short because I don't have a super lot of
Mhm.
information about them, but
A super
one
lot.
is a super lot. This is a
It's like
great
it's like
indication of how this episode's going to go.
yeah. Yeah.
So at the time of this recording, it was 2 weeks ago for you, 2 Sundays ago, at the Dolphins Patriots game. I'm pretty sure that's who played each other.
Mhm.
A Patriots fan got into a fight with a Dolphins fan in like the stadium, and the Dolphins fan punched him, and the guy like fell of some sort, hit his head, and died.
Yeah.
So really, really tragic. Really like I know things get really, really heated at football games and there's alcohol, but please, 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 like remember we have more in common than we do apart. And let's
Mhm.
be kind to each other and don't fight with each other. Cause I don't know if this is true too. I think Kevin told me like the guy's son was there too, like with his like
God.
even, because you go there with like your family, your friends,
Yeah.
like so just please be kind to each other when you're out at games because this is absolutely
Yeah.
tragic and never what you want to hear at a football game.
And that's the thing, like anytime you get into a physical altercation like that, like obviously I'm sure that was not this person's intent, but anytime you do that, this could be the outcome. Like, I mean, you hear
Yeah.
about random bar fights where it's like you just punch someone just right, or they fall and land on something, or like, just things like this that like freak things happen, and just,
hmm
you don't really just don't do it. And you don't have to worry about
Yeah.
that. Because I mean,
Like your push or your punch might not hurt them, but like you could fall and you can
yeah,
hit your head and hit your face and like you're still responsible for that. Like you caused
exactly.
that. Like,
And I mean, they could hit an innocent bystander who could then fall, things like
yeah.
that. Not that the person who was hit was not innocent, but someone who was not involved in the altercation. Have you seen anything about charges for the person that punched him?
I haven't. I just got an ESPN update, like in general, saying like it seems like the guy was maybe punched twice, but I don't know if it's just still really early in the investigation or if I just don't know the
Yeah.
information. But by the time this comes out, I'm sure more information will be available.
Yeah, that's super sad.
And speaking of people dying, our next update. So this is one of these cases. Me and Jack will talk about it. We're like, how have we never fucking heard of this person? And
Hmm.
then you learn it's happened like really recently, and you're just like, what is going on? So this guy's name, I'm gonna butcher it, but I don't really care.
Hmm.
His name is Billy Cheermere? That sounded absolutely ridiculous. Cheermere. It's spelled Chermir. So sorry.
Remember.
I'm apologizing to any good people out there with that name. But
Yes.
for this guy, I don't care. So he was basically a serial killer in like North Texas. I think I saw maybe Dallas area. He's been indicted. I think he was convicted for so he was indicted for 22 murders and he was convicted on some of those. So they think there's at least 22 murders. There's probably more.
Mm-hmm.
He was just sentenced like last April 2022. But he was murdered today in his cell. I only found one article that said this. My mom also heard it from like a separate source because my mom's the one who told me about this. And is that like he was making kind of like a like inappropriate sexual comment about his cellmate's child. And the guy just bye, which also maybe a little bit of jailhouse justice. So
yeah, it happens.
He was sentenced to life in prison, and that was not very long.
Yeah.
But
yeah, like Courtney said, we were talking about this before we started recording, and I'm just like, how have we not heard of this? Like for something so recent too. I just don't. And how many times is this happening with other people that we never hear about? And you're just like, I'm sorry, this one random person murdered how many people, and it's literally not even news. Like,
and I know we talked about it a lot all the time being like, there were so many serial killers in the 70s, and they're not here anymore. And I'm like, well, here's one, and nobody's talking about it.
Exactly. Yeah, that is pretty wild.
And I listen to a lot of true crime podcasts, so I think I would have remembered hearing about this.
Yeah, because that's the thing. Like most of them do, like we do, with like these updates in the beginning of, here's what's happening in the true crime world and everything. And yeah, I've definitely not heard this update, but maybe we'll look more into it and see if it's episode worthy to get you guys all the information on that.
Yeah, and now I think I'm going to go ahead and just take a sip of water and then dive right into this episode.
Yes, and I just want to say real quick too that the book that we read for this episode has been on my list of books that I've wanted to read for like several years. I can't remember how it first came into my brain, but it's been on that list for a long time. And then a few weeks ago, I was at my aunt's house, and my family loves their books, so my aunt has a ton of books, like we all do. And so it's crazy that I just happened to I was like walking out of the bathroom, just walking into the living room, and happened to spot it on her bookshelf. And I was like, oh my God, like I've been wanting to read this book for a long time. I'm going to borrow this. So shout out to my Aunt Gail if you are listening. Thanks for letting us borrow the book, because I've been very much wanting to read it, and I do very highly recommend it. We don't always recommend the books that we read for this podcast because sometimes they're a struggle. And there's a lot of details that we didn't include. This is already going to be a long 2-parter. But if you want all those extra details, anything you could ever possibly want to know about every person even remotely involved in this case, it is all in there. But it is a really good read. I did enjoy it a lot, but just wanted to give the shout out to Aunt Gail for the source material.
Yes. And our sources are that book, which is called 83 Hours Till Dawn, by Jean Miller and Barbara Jane Mackle. And All That's Interesting article, a Corrections 1 article, and a Cinemaholic article. So at 4 a.m. on Tuesday, December 17th, 1968, 20-year-old Barbara Mackle was awakened to the sound of her mother speaking to someone outside of their hotel room. So her friend Stuart had left their hotel room earlier that evening and had driven home in a white Ford truck. So Barbara's mother, Jane, told her that 2 policemen at the door said a young man driving a white Ford had been in an accident and was asking for them. Barbara told her mother not to open the door, but she unlocked it, and suddenly 2 men pushed the door open, and Barbara saw a gun. So the larger man was wearing a yellow sweater, dark pants, and a police hat. Barbara didn't think he looked mean, and he wasn't wearing a mask or like anything to hide his identity. Like his face was still very much visible. And the other man appeared to be an older boy and followed the larger man. So Barbara was in shock and remained calm, and Jane was angry because she thought they were being robbed. So she was like telling them like, get their jewelry and get out. And the man said he wouldn't hurt them for her to just sit on the bed. The boy started to tie her up, and Jane just kept yelling at them like to get their stuff and to leave. Like she's like, can you just get this over with and just leave already and leave us alone?
Yeah, she's like, take whatever you want. Like, I don't care. Just get it and go. I'm done with this.
Yeah. I'm tired. Okay. Can you just leave? It's 4 a.m.
It's the middle of the night. I'm trying to go back to sleep, people.
Yeah. So the larger man held a gun to Barbara's head, and the smaller man put a rag with chloroform on Jane's face. Barbara yelled at her mom not to fight them, and the boy told Jane the chloroform was harmless. So Jane started to feel dizzy, and Barbara was expecting to be tied up as well, but the man said they weren't going to tie her up. Instead, he grabbed Barbara and yanked her out the hotel room door. There was a car waiting in the parking lot, and the whole ordeal only took a few minutes. So they put Barbara inside the car, and the boy got into the back seat with her. They told her not to do anything wrong and she wouldn't get hurt, and they also said they had a gun and they weren't afraid to use it. So Barbara Mackle was a junior at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. She was from Miami, Florida, where her dad, Robert Mackle, was well-known home builder and land developer, along with his two brothers. So they all worked for the multi-million-dollar company, Deltona Corporation. So well-known, kind of rich, basically.
Which is still around today, by the way, because I looked it up the other night and found their website. And, they have some reasonably priced homes for that area if you guys are looking.
Not bad, not bad.
In case we have anyone in the Miami area. It seems like they're all like gated community type.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's what they do. But yeah, anyway, just thought I'd let you know they're still around.
So Barbara also had an older brother named Bob, and she graduated from Everglades School for Girls and was the class valedictorian, class president, and member of the National Honor Society. So Barbara started college majoring in math, but then switched to economics. Her best friend was Stuart Woodward, and they would go to Stone Mountain every weekend during the school year for bike riding, kite flying, ice skating, etc. He had visited her family home in Miami on several occasions. So the Mackles had a friendly relationship with then President-elect Richard Nixon. And in the summer of 1968, Barbara had worked at a telephone information booth at the Republican National Convention at Miami Beach. So her and her family are just well known, I guess, in this area. Like,
very well known in the community, very wealthy, very well connected. Again, this happened in December. So Nixon had been elected in November and then would take office in January.
So
this was right before he was
Who
sworn
was the
into
president
office.
before Nixon?
Don't ask me anything. I'm not even going to make a guess and look like a moron. I'll Google it.
Okay. While you're Googling it, I will tell the most impressive thing. So there was a question at trivia that was like, who was the, I don't know, maybe I think they said 37th president of the United States. And my dad just sat there and was like, Biden, Trump, Obama, Bush, or Clinton, Bush, this, and like literally was like, it's this. And then just.
That is wild. It was Lyndon B. Johnson. Who was
Lyndon B. Johnson. Okay.
Between Kennedy and Nixon. Yes.
Okay, cool. So he must have been 36th, and I think Richard Nixon was 37th, because I think we landed on Richard Nixon was 37th, and my dad just counted it right backwards.
Yes, Nixon was 37th, according to this article. I just wanted to clarify, I did not have that on the top of my head. But yes, this article does say 37.
Okay, so just to kind of set the scene where we're at here,
Yes, a little U.S. history with our kidnapping.
So the flu was rampant that year and had been declared an epidemic in 24 states by December of 1968. So like many students, Barbara came down with the flu, but the university infirmary was full. So 4 days before her kidnapping, Barbara's mother had flown from Miami to Atlanta to care for Barbara. And they checked into the Roadway Inn on Claremont Road, which is just northeast of Emory University. And they spent several days cooped up inside the hotel room while Barbara ran a fever and suffered through congestion, a cough, and body aches. Like, I'm sure if you've had the flu, you just kind of know how it is. It's just rough for
it is
days.
Not a good time. Yeah.
So on Saturday, December 14th, they received a call in their hotel room saying that someone had mailed Barbara a registered letter. So Barbara was in the middle of her final examinations and had let a classmate borrow her econ notes and assumed it was just him mailing them back. And because she was so sick, she forgot about the call and the notes. I'm sure she was just like, when you have a high fever like that, you're just like hallucinating and can't remember anything. So
yeah, you're like, I don't know what the hell is happening right now.
Yeah, and when she was awakened by the sound of her mother talking to someone at the door, Barbara had been in the middle of a feverish and restless sleep.
Again, just trying to like set the scene of like she's just so out of it. Like think about how you feel, when you were so sick and then this is happening like in the middle of that.
I bet you're to a
Also,
point where you're like, is this even real?
right?
Am
Yeah,
I just
absolutely.
imagining this?
Like this can't possibly be real. Also just want to add the whole thing about the registered letter being mailed. That will come back at the very end of part 2. So I just wanted to don't hang on to that piece of information. It will come back around, but we got a lot to talk about before we get there.
Yeah.
So
It's a long payoff there.
yes.
So the man driving the car told the boy to chloroform Barbara, and Barbara said she would just put her head down and wouldn't look at them, so that wouldn't be necessary. She put her head in his lap, and then the boy spoke, and Barbara realized this was a young woman, not a boy like she thought. So the woman said that Barbara was running a fever because she could feel how warm her face was. And Barbara noticed that the woman had a Spanish accent. And since she was from Miami, Barbara wondered if the girl was Cuban and from Miami as well, and if they knew her and had a reason for kidnapping her specifically. So the woman tried to chloroform Barbara several times, but Barbara kept resisting, and the woman eventually stopped trying. So the man said he hoped they wouldn't get stopped by the Georgia cops and that he had enough trouble with them. So they drove for less than 15 minutes and then stopped. So the man was surprised that Barbara was still conscious, and the woman said that Barbara was being good, and the man said she better and told her again to chloroform her. So the woman said to Barbara, "You're missing an exam, aren't you?" Barbara told her that she was, and the woman asked in what class. So Barbara told her economics and then asked if she was from Miami. And the woman then said she couldn't talk to her. So they kind of had this little bit of a conversation, and the woman's like, "I better stop. We can't talk."
Yeah. But it made it clear that she's like, okay, like these people know something about me, and she's trying to like see what information she can get out of them. And then the girl is like, oh, well actually, let me backtrack.
Whoop, I'm going to get in trouble. So the man got in the back seat of the car and was searching for a flashlight. Barbara was able to get a good look at both of their faces then. She noticed that the woman had very green eyes. And when he finally found the flashlight and turned it on, Barbara noticed she was in a station wagon with a lot of stuff. So the man told the woman to keep Barbara's head down so she wouldn't see the house. And she tried talking to Barbara to keep her distracted. She asked her about her exam again, and Barbara asked if she was in school. So she started to say no, but George, and then stopped talking. Like she realized she probably shouldn't have said that. Like, oh no, the number one rule of kidnapping, we don't use real names here.
Yeah, she's like, oh, wait a minute.
This is clearly this girl's first rodeo.
Yeah.
So the man came back and said that Jake and the boys dug the hole too deep. So Barbara got cold at some point and the woman offered her her shirt. She started to panic because she thought they were going to try to kill her and put her in this hole. And she kept telling the woman how nice she was and was trying to like flatter her in an attempt to get away. Like, we've been talking and now I'll just start being like, oh, you're so nice. You're so wonderful. Like, flatter her in any attempt. And then the woman told Barbara she was nice and sweet and so well mannered because she kept saying, yes, sir, and yes, ma'am. So I'm like, I know this is like a kidnapping situation, but this is sounding like two drunk girls in the bathroom being like, no, I love you. I love you.
Yeah. Very weird demeanor from your kidnapper.
Yeah, not what you're expecting in that moment. So after a while, the man came back into the car and tied Barbara's ankles together. He told her she'd been kidnapped and that they had asked for quite a lot of money, but they were sure her father could get it. He told her he had something important to tell her and that she should listen closely. So the man told Barbara they were going to put her in an underground room, and she had oxygen coming from a battery, and the battery would run out in 7 days. There was also a light down there, but if the light was left on, the battery would run out in 5 days. He told her there was a house nearby, and they would come check on her every 2 hours to make sure she wasn't trying to escape. He said she had water inside and a long hose to drink out of. He also told her she would be underwater, and that if she cracked the walls trying to get out, the water would come in and she would drown. And he said if any water did start to come in, there was a pump she could turn on and a light and buzzer would go off in the house to notify them so they could come get her. He said using the pump would also decrease the battery life, though. So he's like, be careful with this battery because the more you use it, the quicker it's dying out. But obviously, again, very planned, whatever they're doing. That they have this whole room box built with all of this. So Barbara was panicking and even asking him like why he was doing this, begged for him to hold her hostage inside the house instead. So the man said he couldn't and that he would have to ask the boss. So Barbara told him her father could pay, and he responded that he, quote, knew Mackle would pay the money. So this was the first time Barbara heard him use her name. And the girl also said, don't worry, Barbara will come check on you every 2 hours. I'll be right there. So Barbara asked if she could use some nose drops because of the flu, and the woman tried to persuade the man, but he said no. He also demanded her watch and started removing all buttons and zippers from her clothing. He also took her ring and said that would be used to prove to her father that they really had her.
The man told Barbara it wasn't just him and the woman, and that they had people in Atlanta and Miami too. He instructed the woman to give Barbara the shot to calm her down and told her he was only giving her half strength so she would still be awake. The woman pulled down Barbara's gown and her pants up and gave her the shot. He instructed her to chloroform Barbara again. So she tried to turn her head sideways and like hold her breath and then pretend to pass out, but he knew he was faking it, so he did it himself. And also want to say here that like a lot of times when you see movies and they chloroform, it's like, oh, they put it on and then you immediately pass out. And like, that's not really how it works. Like you like start to get like loopy and like, you know, you may start to lose consciousness, but it's not like an immediate like, oh, and you're out. So that's probably how he knew she was faking. Cause like, oh, she's not going to immediately pass out.
Because I think people can use chloroform as like a drug too, like get high on chloroform. I don't think it's common, but I think people have done it before.
Yeah. I mean, people also
people
like
have paint,
huff
you know?
Yeah.
Like, so
you can use anything if you choose.
It is very hard to
enough.
get chloroform though. I do. That sounds like I know it for bad reasons, but I don't. Okay, I just know someone who has a business that uses chloroform sometimes. But like that person has to have like someone write a prescription like for chloroform to get it for his business.
Yeah. So basically the man's like, okay, like this woman's not doing anything. I'm going to do it myself. So he puts the chloroform on Barbara's face. And then he took her watch as like she was starting to lose consciousness. And she remembers him saying, poor little rich girl, she only has an Elgin, which I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's a type of watch, but it's a very mid-priced.
It's not a Rolex.
Yeah, exactly. It's a very mid-priced watch brand. So basically he's like making fun of her like, oh, like this rich girl has this like cheap watch. So he carried her a few feet away and put her on top of a blanket on the grass. He then put a cardboard sign under her chin and told her he was going to take a picture. So now when she opened her eyes, he was wearing a ski mask. She's barely conscious at this point from the chloroform, and he took her picture with a Polaroid camera, but when it printed out, he said that she had to do it again because her eyes were closed and they had to be open in the picture to prove that she was alive. And Barbara wasn't even aware that her eyes had been closed, but he took her picture again and she tried really hard to keep her eyes open. So the man wrapped Barbara in the blanket and started carrying her through the woods. He was really like struggling under her weight and just kept stumbling. And then finally he placed her inside a box in a hole. And so her first thought was that this was too small to be the underground room he mentioned because she couldn't sit up or even like straighten out her feet all the way. And she's like, this isn't an underground room. This is a box. Like this is a coffin. This is not what you said it was going to be. So the man then started yelling at the woman for not fixing the water, and he called her Ruthie. So they both just fucking up this whole name situation. So
for real.
Yeah. So the girl said no, that she wouldn't do it, and he kept yelling at her, and they were arguing. And then finally she crawled into the box as well and handed Barbara a water tube. She then left, and they placed a lid on the box, and Barbara heard them screwing the lid into place. And then she heard dirt start pouring on top of the box, and the sound started becoming more muffled, which I just cannot imagine the amount of terror you were feeling at that moment.
No.
Yeah. So Barbara could hear the man through the tubes like that were going into the box. So basically, you know, she has this fan that she can turn on to get oxygen coming in. So there has to be something coming in from outside of the box. So like she can hear him talking out there. And so he asked her if she knew how to work the pump. And she's like, no, I don't. Like, show me how to do it again, you know, trying anything to get him to open up the box. She also begged to be let out and said that she had to tell him something important, that she had to talk to the boss. Like, she would make everything okay. Like, she had to talk to the boss. Like, she needs to tell him something important. But eventually they just stopped responding. And Barbara realized that she was alone and buried in a box underground. So she started panicking, but was able to calm herself down. She had always been afraid of the dark, so she decided to turn on the light for a little bit. So once she did, she found that there were instructions inside the box that had been like typed and then copied. She could tell it wasn't like the original from a typewriter. It had been typed and then photocopied. So the instructions started with, "Do not be alarmed, you are safe." And then they went on to repeat everything the man had told her about where she was, how often they were coming, that she was underneath water. And the instructions went on to say that the box contained water jugs with 3 gallons of water and a straw, a pump to evacuate water in an emergency, a bucket to use the bathroom, and Kotex menstrual pads if she needed them. There was also candy, some apples, and a blanket and a mat. And the instructions said that there were tranquilizers for sleeping, but Barbara didn't immediately see them. The instructions also said that they were sure her father would pay the ransom within the week, but if he didn't, they would release her after a week anyway, and she would be home for Christmas either way. So Barbara knew her air battery would run out sooner if the light was on, so she tried turning it off, but then she just kept panicking each time and had to like turn it back on because she's like, I can't handle this like in the dark and I'm buried underground. Like it was a source of comfort, so she kept turning it back on. And remember, she is still running a fever and unable to breathe through her nose. So the whole time that she is trapped in this box, she has the flu. Like, again, just
so you already feel like you can't
scenario.
breathe, and then that on top of it. Oof.
Yeah. So remember the man had said if she turns on the pump, like it'll like alert them in the house. So she's like, okay, so I'm gonna turn on the pump to try to like get their attention, see what happens. The pump made a very loud noise and it startled her, but then no one ever came. So Barbara then started counting seconds to pass the time. So she counted out 2 hours in seconds. So like for 2 hours straight, she is just counting to know how much time it's been. And no one ever came to check on her. So that's when Barbara realized that nothing they told her was true. They were not nearby in a house. The pump did not alert anyone, and no one was coming to check on her every 2 hours.
Yeah, she was completely alone.
Yeah. Meanwhile, back at the motel, Barbara's mom, Jane, was conscious. She had pretended to pass out from the chloroform, but was awake and saw them take Barbara. So she knocked the phone off the receiver, but was unable to call for help because she was bound with tape. So then she saw that the motel room door had been left ajar, so she was able to hop outside, and she screamed for help, but no one came. So she hopped to Barbara's car and laid on the horn in the hopes of waking someone up. So 71 of the 120 rooms were occupied that night. So someone should have heard these pleas for help. I mean, it's, 4:30 at this point. It's obviously still the middle of the night, but it's not like people should be there.
And I feel like even if you were like, what in the world? Like, people are so quick to call and complain to the front desk, like, somebody is screaming in the room next to me. Will you tell them to be quiet, kind of thing? So it's like, how did nobody just say anything?
Exactly. Well, Courtney, finally, Beverly Jenkins in the room next to them woke up and called the front desk to see what all the commotion was.
Oh my God. I didn't even read that sentence, guys.
Literally the very next sentence.
Like I said,
usually
guys,
it's me, so
we do the bare minimum reading these notes.
We're always so surprised by half the story.
Oh my God.
It's even better than being surprised by the ending. It's like not knowing what happens in the middle, but knowing the ending.
I know.
So finally the person next to her called the front desk. So the front desk manager came out, and he initially told Jane to like keep it down because he's like, what are you doing? Like, this is a nice place. Like, we don't do that here. And then he saw that she was all tied up. So she requested scissors from her room. So then he like went and gave them to her, didn't cut them off her. He gave her the scissors. So then she had to cut them off herself. And then he went and got the phone number for the police after she like keeps telling him like, my daughter has been taken. So then he's like, okay, well, here's the phone number. Didn't call. He didn't call. He gave her the phone number to call.
Goodness gracious.
Is this man just so completely inept? Like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
So he just kind of seemed reluctant to believe her story. So Jane called the DeKalb County Police herself at 4:11 a.m. She also called Stewart, who lived nearby, and asked him to come to the motel. And when Stewart arrived, Jane asked him to get a hold of her husband. So he went to a nearby phone booth and called long distance to reach 57-year-old Robert Francis Mackle. So Robert instructed Stewart to contact the FBI and that he didn't want anyone else knowing about this yet. When the police arrived at the motel and asked if there was any reason to suspect kidnapping, Jane said no. He asked if there was money in the family, and she tried to like be all vague, like, oh, I don't know, because she didn't like to talk about money. But Stewart is like, yes, the Mackles are associated with the Deltona Corporation, which again is a very wealthy, well-known corporation. She's trying to be like, well, I mean, like, it's not like we have a ton of money.
Define money. Define rich.
And Stewart's like, yeah, no, they got plenty of money. That's probably it. So Robert Mackle called his brother Frank and his friend and right-hand employee Billy Vessels around 5 a.m., and Robert and Billy booked a 7:15 a.m. flight to Atlanta. He asked his brother-in-law, which was Jane's sister's husband, to stay at their house in Miami to answer any calls because he was worried that if Barbara had been kidnapped for ransom, the kidnappers might be trying to reach him via phone, and he didn't want to miss it when he was on an airplane. So they arrived in Atlanta at 8:55 a.m. and took a taxi to the motel. So they were met by FBI agents Roger Cass and William J. Watry, and they said that they had agents on campus at Emory University speaking to students and faculty who knew Barbara. So William H. O'Dowd, who worked for the Deltona Corporation, arrived at the Mackle house to help out as well. And at 9:10 a.m., the phone rang and O'Dowd answered it. So the man on the phone asked if he was Robert Mackle, and O'Dowd said no, that Robert was on the way to Atlanta. There was a pause, and then the man said to tell him to look under a palm tree in the northeast corner of the house, under a rock about 6 inches down. So O'Dowd called the Deltona Corporation and spoke to Robert and Frank's other brother, Elliot. Elliot told him the FBI was on the way to the house and not to do anything. So FBI agents arrived at the Miami house and searched the palm trees and found a single rock in the yard. So they instructed the Mackles' handyman and gardener, Walter, to dig carefully underneath it. And Walter knew the rock hadn't been there the day before, or he would have noticed it. And at 10:10 a.m., they came upon a broken no-neck bottle with a rubber stopper that had some paper folded up inside. And they actually had to like get tweezers from inside the house to be able to remove the paper from inside this like tiny bottle. Mm-hmm. So inside, there were 3 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper that had been typed and photocopied, like the instructions in the box. And I'm going to read you this long ransom note because it includes a lot of specific information that will come up later in the episode. So just bear with me as I pull out this book. I feel like I'm like a teacher.
Okay, class.
So the ransom note read, Robert Mackle, sir, your daughter has been kidnapped by us, and we now hold her for ransom. She is quite safe, if somewhat uncomfortable. We offer no proof of our possession of her at this time. It will arrive by mail in a few days. Barbara is presently alive inside a small capsule buried in a remote piece of soil. She has enough food and water and air to last 7 days. At the end of the 7 days, the life-supporting batteries will be discharged and her air supply will be cut off. The box is waterproof and very strong, fiberglass reinforced plywood. She has very little chance of escaping. The box is in an unusual and lonely place. She has no chance of being accidentally stumbled upon. Contemplate, if you will, the position into which this puts you. If you pay the ransom prior to the 7 days, we will tell you of her whereabouts. Should you catch the messenger we send to pick up the ransom, we will simply not say anything to anyone, and ergo, Barbara will suffocate. The messenger knows only one of us, and he will report to us via radio from the pickup site. We will immediately know his fate. Should you catch all of us, we will never admit anything, as to do so would be suicide, and again, she will die. As you can see, you don't want to catch us, for to do so would be condemning your lovely and intelligent daughter to death. The police may allow you to have a free hand prior to the return of your daughter, should you be so callous as to contact them. If you ask the police to advise you in this matter, please be aware that their very presence will scare us off. We can see no way for you to secure the safe return of your daughter other than to obey our instructions explicitly. Number 1. Although we will always anticipate the involvement of the police in this situation, be assured that if your communication with them or their actual presence is detected, we will break off negotiations with you immediately. We have tied into several of the possible means of communication that you have with the police, and we feel that you will be unable to contact them without our knowledge. Number 2, the ransom will be $500,000 in recently issued $20 bills. Here are the requirements you must meet in this matter. The notes must not be older than 1950 issue. No more than 10 notes may have consecutive serial numbers, i.e. the notes must have a great variety of serial numbers and not be merely shuffled. The notes must be Federal Reserve notes of standard configuration. No more than 1/2 of the notes may be uncirculated. No form of marking on the bills is acceptable. Please note that the bills will undergo a minimum of 8 hours of intense examination before we allow you to have knowledge of the subject's whereabouts. We have planned a series of 44 tests on a large representative sample of the bills. These tests include every chemical and physical test of any remote applicability. No emission, shaving, spotting, cutting, counterfeiting, irradiating ad nos will go undetected. Number 3, the bill should occupy no more than 4,000 cubic inches and thusly fit into a standard large suitcase of inside dimensions 31.5 inches long by 18.75 inches high by 6.25 inches deep. Purchase such a suitcase and lock the bills inside. When you have the money in readiness, call all the Miami area major newspapers and place the following ad in the personal section of the classified advertisements. Loved one, please come home. We will pay all your expenses and meet you anywhere at any time. Your family. Prepare your car for a trip, and on the night of the ad's first appearance, we will call you at your home after midnight to advise you of where to go to deliver the money. You must be the one to deliver the money, Robert. You will dress yourself in an all-white outfit. You must use the Lincoln to deliver the money. In order to prevent the instructional call being traced, it will be very brief and no portion of it will be repeated. If the phone rings more than 3 times or the connection takes longer than 15 seconds, we will not contact you. You will have a limited period of time to make the rendezvous, so you should be ready to leave your house within 1 minute of receiving the phone call in order to be within the time limit. You will proceed to the area of the meeting within the legal speed limit as if you were in no hurry. We will not meet you if you fail to show within the time limit, which is only a short time longer than you will require to drive to the pickup site. Any unusual police activity or other activity in the area of the pickup will cancel the appointment. When you arrive at the pickup site, you will know it by a signal of 3 short flashes repeated continuously from a flashlight directed at the windshield of your car. When you see the signal, you will stop the car and immediately take the suitcase toward the light. The light will be mounted on top of a box. The suitcase should be placed within the box. You will then return to your car and proceed back up the street in the direction from which you came and go home. Any deviation from this outline will result in your death. Our messenger will have you in his sights from the time you leave your car. Within 12 hours after you deliver the money, you will receive another phone call advising you of your daughter's whereabouts. A letter will also be sent to ensure the finding of your daughter.
That is a long, long note.
Yes. Yes. But as you can see, the rest of the story unfolding has to do with everything that was mentioned in this ransom note, so it was kind of hard to not include everything, but like, holy shit.
So I just think about how one time Kevin's friend texted him like a 7-sentence story and he was like, nah, I'm not reading that. So if I get kidnapped, I'm screwed.
Don't worry, I got you. You know, I will read and scrutinize and reread and read
highlight,
into and
make corrections, make grammatical corrections.
I got you. I got you if you're ever sent a ransom note. Just tell Kevin, give me a call. I'll come read it. It'll be okay. Also want to note that the $500,000 mentioned is equivalent to about $4 million today. So
that's a lot of money.
I
know her family's rich, but Jesus Christ.
Yeah. So now, obviously, the FBI knew they definitely had a kidnapping for ransom on their hands. Like, there's no question anymore of, like, what this situation is.
So reporter Orville Gaines from the Atlanta Journal would call around to police stations every morning before the news deadline to get any stories. So he called the DeKalb County Police and learned that a girl from Emory University had been kidnapped. So reporter David Norden was sent to the police station where he was able to get the full police report from an officer. So the report had Barbara's full name and Miami, but no specific address. So he reached out to a newspaper in Miami to try and get an address for the Mackle family. So Norden wondered if this was like the Mackle family because he knew how wealthy and prominent they were, but didn't think the police seemed to realize that. He was like, did the police realize who this family is?
Yes, they didn't realize what they were dealing with.
Yeah. The Atlanta Journal didn't want to release the story if it would jeopardize Barbara's safety, so they tried reaching out to the FBI and letting them know they would hold the story if they were told to. But the FBI would only say no comment and wouldn't acknowledge that they knew about Barbara's kidnapping. Therefore, the story of Barbara Mackle's kidnapping broke at 12:05 p.m., which I think is crazy in general that they even showed the respect to be like, if they tell us to hold this story, I mean, I'm sure they do that semi-often, but to be like, we'll hold this, and the FBI is like, no comment, and they're like, your own fault.
Like, okay, we tried. Yeah, they mentioned in the book that, like, I guess journalists had been like receiving like a bad rap recently for, you know, doing stuff like that, of just like putting it out there and not showing any consideration for like situations or anything like that. So they're like, look, like we're trying, but like also like this is major news. Like we have to report this if you're not going to specifically tell us that we should not for the safety of this girl. And they just wouldn't say anything. So they're like, okay, well, here we go.
Yeah. So Bill O'Dowd went to the First National Bank of Miami, where the corporation banked, and showed the manager, Robert Bruce, a copy of the ransom note and told him that he needed $500,000 in $20 bills, which would be so many $20 bills, might we add.
Yeah.
So Bruce...
I'm not even going to remember. I want to say it was like 25,000. It was a very large number of $20 bills, but I probably got that wrong. You could do the math, but I'm not going to.
So Bruce went to the head teller to see how much cash the bank had on hand at that time. So reporters started swarming the motel, and now that the story broke, Robert and Jane had their son Bob contacted and told him to fly to Atlanta. So Elliot did not want Robert to know the details of the ransom note, so he just told him there was a note and it was being flown to Washington to check for any evidence. So they were like, don't even worry about reading this. Just don't worry about it.
They're like, we don't want him to know all of these details. Like, we want to handle everything and like involve him as little as possible.
Yeah. So First National Bank reached back out to O'Dowd and said the teller confirmed they had enough cash on hand to lend them the $500,000. So he would need to go in and sign a note for a loan, and it would be registered as a personal loan at the 6.5% interest rate at the time, since the Mackles didn't have $500,000 available in their bank accounts. So FBI agents went to the First National Bank, and the head teller and 3 other bank employees started processing the $20 bills according to the requirements in the ransom note. So they decided to photocopy the bills so they would have proof of which ones were provided to the kidnapper, so it would hopefully be used to, like, in court one day, be like, look, we have the exact photocopies of the serial numbers of all these bills. So they're thinking like, long term.
Yeah, like they want to know exactly which bills are going to the kidnapper. So if they're ever used, now they have an opportunity to trace it back to this person if they aren't able to find out soon who the kidnapper was.
And this was done under FBI observation, since copying money was a felony. So the FBI also started searching for a suitcase that met the required dimensions in the ransom note. So they were discouraged to find out that it wasn't a standard size. So of course it has to be difficult. It's not going to be easy to just go buy one. So they
remember, like, it's the 60s. Like, we're not Amazon priming anything to get exactly what we need immediately. Like,
you're not Googling out like a suitcase with dimensions and being like, oh, it's the Belk that's 3 exits away or whatever. So they looked at nearby stores and also called bank board members who own local department stores to see if anything they had would work, just trying to reach out to anyone who could help them. So the FBI decided they needed to manually record the serial numbers of the money because they ran into trouble with the photocopying not being clear enough. So there were 1,012 bank employees, and 118 of them were bank officers. So the 85 bank officers who were still there for the day were told this was an urgent matter and that would go late into the night and that they would need to stay. So Bruce introduced the FBI and told his employees they needed to copy serial numbers and not to ask any questions. Like, just do this. Don't ask me why. Quicker you get it done, the quicker you go home.
Exactly.
And although they weren't told what had happened, many had seen the newspaper that afternoon and could easily guess what they were doing. So Miami News ran the story at 1:10 p.m., and many people were familiar with the Mackles. So the bank's vice chairman, Carl Bruns, realized that his wife, Bea, might have a suitcase that fit the dimensions. So he called her, she measured it, and it was almost perfect. So he's like, okay, perfect. Someone's coming to pick it up. So the FBI had the Mackle family request that their phone lines be tapped. The equipment wasn't in yet, but it would be installed for both the home phone and the phone at the roadway inn. So friends, family, and the media kept calling the house, and the FBI kept trying to keep the phone line open in case the kidnappers called back. They're like, please stop calling because we need to wait for the important call.
Yeah, exactly.
And 3 nights before the kidnapping, DeKalb County police officer Jerry G. Smith had put his policeman hat on the rack at the Pancake House near the Roadway Inn, and it was stolen. So many suspect this is where the kidnapper was able to get a policeman hat to gain entry into the Mackles motel room. So Barbara's friend Stuart was treated as a suspect since he was familiar with the family and the last person to have seen Barbara and Jane before the kidnappers arrived. So Stuart's parents flew in and they drove Stuart home to Charlotte, North Carolina the next day. So they were tailed by FBI who wanted to make sure they just didn't go anywhere else. So he's kind of being, you always suspect someone who might know them, know their money situation. So they're just keeping an eye on him.
Yeah.
So FBI Inspector Rex I. Schroeder arrived in Atlanta from Washington, D.C. to take over the investigation. He shared the ransom note with Robert Mackle for the first time, and it actually made Robert feel better because he felt like they were dealing with intelligent people who just wanted money and that they wouldn't murder Barbara for no reason. He's like, okay, they just want money. They don't want to hurt her. She's not in a great position right now, but we can solve this.
Yeah, like the way it's written, he's just like, okay, like this is exactly what they want. If we give that to them, they will tell us where Barbara is. Like everything will be fine. Like we're not dealing with someone that he's like, oh, they're just like unhinged and they have no plan and they're just like panicky and like all this stuff. And he's like, no, like this is super thought out and I think that's all they want and it'll be okay.
Yeah, and he said he knew his brothers would have seen the ransom note earlier and that he was sure the money was already in progress. Robert was very claustrophobic, so he was hoping it wasn't true that Barbara had actually been buried in a box, but he was worried that it was true because he's like, that's, again, nightmarish. Nightmarish.
Yeah.
So many of the FBI agents didn't believe that part of the ransom note was true, and it was just a lie to get them to get the money more quickly. So everyone involved in the investigation decided that the Mackles would be most helpful back at home in Miami since the kidnappers had made contact there. Schroeder also wondered how intimate with the family the kidnapper was because he mentioned Robert's Lincoln in the ransom note, but Robert had just purchased that car six weeks before. So it's a very, very new car. So they're like, they know this family somewhat.
Yeah.
So Robert, Jane, and Bob Mackle left the motel shortly after 7 p.m. to go back to the airport. So bank officers finished recording the serial numbers close to midnight. It took 6 hours, and the bank employees copied more than 6 million digits on 296 pages.
Like my hand hurts reading that sentence.
Yeah, same.
It is insane.
And the money fit almost perfectly inside the suitcase they found. So they're like, okay, finally, here we go. We're getting somewhere here.
Which also makes me think about, like we talked about how meticulous everything has been so far and like all of the details and the thought that was put into exactly how much space they would need for that amount of money. Like it wasn't like they're just like throwing something random out there. Like they knew exactly how big that suitcase needed to be to fit $500,000 in $20 bills.
Which
like,
is just insane. How do you test that? And like, I don't think many people have that much money just sitting around to like figure that out.
Yeah, like you would just have to like do a bunch of math equations with like the size of a bill. Yeah, it's wild.
So Assistant Professor Marshall Case contacted the FBI and said he might have some information about Barbara's kidnapping. So on Saturday morning, December 14th, he'd been at Emory grading final papers when he was approached by a large male with a striking beard and a petite woman with short hair. So they asked if he had a list of students at the school. So Professor Case told them that the list existed, but he didn't have a copy of it. He asked who they were looking for, and he thought they said Ruth Shearer. Sorry if I pronounced her name wrong, Ruth. So Professor Case thought this was odd because Ruth was his secretary, and the couple left and he saw them get into a blue station wagon that he thought was a Volkswagen, and the car had Massachusetts plates. So Professor Case called Ruth at her home and described the couple, and Ruth said that didn't sound like familiar to like anyone she knew. Later that day, Professor Case came upon the same couple, and the man was on the phone talking to the operator, saying he needed to get the phone number for Emory University and that he was trying to reach Barbara Mackle and it was an emergency. So eventually he heard the man tell the young woman that Barbara was at the Roadway Inn. The FBI agent asked if Professor Case remembered the license plate number, but he didn't. But he said he was sure it was a blue station wagon with Massachusetts plates. He thought it was a Volkswagen, and he thought the license plate had a Y and a 0 and a 2.
So on Wednesday, December 18th, with the assistance of the FBI, the Mackles ran the ad in the classified section of the Miami Herald as instructed. So the line ran in 3,500, no, 3, wait. Clearly, numbers are hard. So the line ran in 352,620 papers that morning. FBI Inspector Leroy I. Couche was a similar size and build as Robert, and they decided that he would be used as a decoy for the money drop. The FBI also wanted to have Robert's Lincoln set up with cameras and microphones, so the car was sent off for them to work on it. And when it returned, a hidden radio transmitting unit was in the car, and a microphone was concealed in the driver's air conditioning vent. So the regular antenna served as the aerial, and they were prepared to have an FBI agent inside the trunk of the car, which had an oxygen tank and a trunk lid that had been fixed to be able to open from the inside. However, Robert was adamant that they not send an FBI agent in the car because he believed the kidnappers would have him travel to several locations. Once he got one place, then they would contact him and tell him how to go to the next place and so on. And he was afraid that they would search the trunk eventually and that Barbara would be killed if they found out the FBI was involved.
Yeah.
So they picked up the suitcase of money, which weighed 75 pounds.
I was wondering how heavy it would be. Again, didn't read the notes, but I was like, how heavy is this suitcase going to be with all these $20 bills in it?
Yeah, 75 pounds. So they picked up the suitcase and waited for the kidnapper to call about the delivery. So the Mackle family was worried about the suitcase because it was used. So it did have some distinguishing dents and scratches on it. And that was the only suitcase that they could find to meet the required dimensions. But the Mackles were afraid that the kidnappers would be angry because the suitcase was easily identifiable. Anyone who knew the suitcase going in could easily say oh yeah, this is the one because here's, this dent that I knew was here, this scratch, whatever. So while they were waiting for the kidnappers to call, the FBI, were continuing to search, and they were able to locate and purchase a new suitcase that also met the dimensions. So they moved the money to that one instead. So that night, Father John Christopher Mulcahy at the Catholic Rectory of the Church of the Little Flower, where the Mackles attended, received a phone call. So a man told him that he was Barbara's kidnapper and that she was safe. He explained that she was buried 15 to 20 inches underground and that she had food and water, but she was sick and wearing very little clothing. He said there was a battery-powered fan that would last 5 to 7 days and, quote, when the battery ran out, she would run out. So the man instructed the priest to go to the Mackle house and tell them their daughter was alive and that they should follow the instructions that were left under the rock beside the tree or their lovely daughter would die. Then he hung up. Meanwhile, Bill O'Dowd was driving around in an attempt to find white pants for Robert since the ransom note specified that he deliver the money in an all-white outfit. And it was difficult to find white pants in Robert's size at this time, so they had to try several different stores until they finally found them. Again, we can't just look them up online we're just searching everywhere for man's white pants in 1968.
But if that's not how things go, this is obviously a very serious scenario this is happening in. But have you ever been I just need a black cami top to go with this outfit? And you go to 7 stores and you find every color except that one?
Yep.
If that's not how life goes. So I'm sure these people were just how in the world is there not a single pair of white pants?
I just need white pants. And the book even went into detail about what Robert's size was, and they couldn't get him in that size, but they got one in the size below and the one above, and they're we'll make one of them work.
Get a belt, just wear a belt.
Exactly. We'll figure it out.
Do the little rubber band button trick.
Yes. So the priest went to the Mackle home and shared what the caller said. So he then went back to the church and stayed late in case the kidnapper called again. And if that happened, the FBI instructed the priest to ask what color Barbara's socks were, what the signal was to drop the money, and what Barbara's grandmother's nickname was. So they thought that these 3 questions would be helpful to confirm that they, A, had actually been the ones to take Barbara and knew what she was wearing, B, knew what the ransom note said and could actually deliver on what it said, and C, that they currently had Barbara safe and alive because it wouldn't be common knowledge that her grandmother went by Garmy, so they would need to ask her this and get an answer to provide it. So they're look, these 3 questions will tell us for sure that we are dealing with someone who took Barbara, currently has Barbara, and has the ability to get Barbara back to us. So the FBI set up agents all over Miami to be ready to follow Robert wherever the kidnapper would instruct him to go. So they were told to remain inconspicuous and not to interfere because they didn't want Barbara to be harmed if the kidnappers knew the FBI was involved. The agents also brought their secretaries along with them to pose as their dates because they're like, it's going to look suspicious if the kidnappers are driving around and there's just a bunch of like lone men in cars around the city.
Especially when you can tell these kidnappers are very sophisticated and very like paying attention to detail. They're going to be looking around. All of these men here are just by themselves in cars.
Exactly. Which I thought was a super smart thing to think of like, oh, like bring their secretary so it just looks like they're out on a date, you know? So the FBI did not inform the local police departments of the situation because $500,000 in cash was going to be like left somewhere in the city. So they're like, the less people that know about this, the better. Like if we tell the police departments, like all the people that work for that police department, and then, you know, you have this rookie cop who shares it with his girlfriend and it's just like, we just kind of need to keep this here in the FBI. So then the Mackles received a phone call from a man named Henry Lee Ward in Hot Springs, Arizona. So the FBI were able to trace the call to a bar, and Ward said that he had kidnapped Barbara and would put her on a plane home tomorrow, but he needed $500 wired to him to purchase the plane ticket. So local FBI agents arrived at the bar where the call had been traced, and other patrons confirmed that Ward had been there drinking and had used the phone, but he had already left. So the FBI met him at his house and arrested him, and he was sentenced to 5 years in prison for demanding a ransom via telephone.
What?
Like this guy is just being a fucking moron and like prank calling someone that he knew was waiting on a ransom call, and they sentenced him to 5 years in prison because he technically demanded a ransom over the telephone.
Whoa.
Isn't that wild?
That's like wild. Don't ever joke.
No.
Don't ever joke for a ransom.
The FBI are not playing around. Don't joke with them. They don't
like
Not
jokes.
good. No, not funny.
No.
So they also received several other crank calls throughout the night, but I just had to include that one specifically because I'm like, this man got 5 years in prison for that phone call.
I also have a question.
Yes.
Crank calls?
Yeah, like prank call.
I know, but they are. I've never heard anyone say crank.
Yeah.
Is that just like a more sophisticated term?
Hold on. Yeah, if you just Google it, it just says a prank call, also known as a crank call, is a telephone practical joke.
Okay. I just want to know where crank call is and if people still use that term a lot.
Yeah,
do you still use it?
No, but I also don't know when the last time I talked about prank calls were. But yeah, I guess I would probably say prank call. I think I just used crank because that's what the book said. So
yeah, I know the book was like older, so I was like, is this like a... Anyway, sorry. Got derailed. We can go back on.
I'm wondering if it's either a regional thing or a like time period thing.
I also wonder on like crank calls, is that like the more sophisticated way of saying it? Like, because it's like a crime here. Not the C in crank coming from crime, but you know what I mean? Like maybe like I would be like, I prank called someone, but if like the police got like a quote prank call, they would call it a crank call. Like it's more like a sophisticated term, like a more legal term.
Okay, so this is what Reddit has to say. So like there's no authenticity to any of this, but it sounds right. It seems interesting. But one person said a prank is meant as a joke. A crank is someone who has a strange way of thinking or an eccentric person. Although prank/crank are used interchangeably, they weren't meant to be. Prank calls involve jokes. Crank calls involve long stories to trick the person being called. And then someone else said a prank call is like your refrigerator running type call, and a crank call is like emergency services describing like a bullshit call where like something isn't real.
Gotcha. So it is like more like serious.
Yeah.
Okay. So you got not only a presidential deep dive, you got a crank versus prank deep dive. You're welcome. This is why no one likes being friends with me, because this is what I do all the time. Anytime anyone says anything, I'm like, where the fuck did that come from and what does it mean?
Yeah. But we always need to know all the information.
Did you know that before? Maybe you're smart and you did. Maybe you didn't, like me, and now you do.
But definitely let us know which you used, because I need to know that. Also, how often are people talking about prank calls? Like, how often does this come up in conversation that you I don't know. Immediately jump to which one? This is why it is 10:10 p.m. and we are still fucking talking. Okay, let's go. So at 3:47 a.m., the phone rang at the Mackle house, and a man on the line started providing instructions for where Robert should go. Because Robert was obviously nervous, the FBI agents were like holding up cue cards to remind him, what to say, to ask for confirmation that this is like really the kidnapper on the phone. So like, remember, like, don't get, too worked up. Like, we got to make sure this is really him. So several agents and Billy Vessels also had maps of the entire area out trying to find the locations while Robert wrote down the directions that the kidnapper was providing. Because again, remember, like, you don't know where he's going to tell you to go. This isn't a time where you can just put it in your GPS. So like they had to have all these maps of like all of Miami ready so that when he called, they're like furiously trying to find where it is to go to get there in a short time period. Like it was so stressful to read about. Like I was like getting worked up because I was like, oh God. So in the end, Robert refused to let the FBI stunt double agent go as him. So he took off in the Lincoln himself instead because he's like, they specifically said it was going to be me. I don't want to do anything to jeopardize this. I'm going to go. So because there was a radio in the car, he called off the street names as he was passing them so the agents would know like where he was and could follow him from a safe distance. And he was supposed to take the money to a causeway off of a bridge in a remote area, which is like a water entrance drop-off type situation. If you Google causeway, you can see a picture of it and know what it's talking about. But it was dark outside and the instructions weren't great, so Robert had trouble finding it. So now he starts to panic and he's like getting worried that the kidnappers would like leave if he was late. So eventually he starts crying and panicking and he's like yelling to the agents through the radio, like, I need help. I don't know where I am. I'm running out of time. Like, someone please come help me. So back at the house, Vessels and Agent Edward J. Putz had left in Elliot Mackle's car to assist Robert. Like even before he like specifically asked for help, they were like, we have to get this guy some help because he is freaking out. So also, FBI agent Warren R. Welsh knew the area well because he had previously lived there. So as he was driving in the general area after hearing Robert's pleas for help, he passed a blue station wagon with Massachusetts plates. So he obviously couldn't turn around because it would be obvious that he was following him. But he was like, okay, I need to make sure that I intercept Vessels and Agent Putz before they're seen and ruin this operation because like I just passed the kidnappers. I know they're here. I also know from the radio that Vessels and this agent are going to where Robert is. So like, what am I supposed to do? Like I have to stop him. So they were told to ram their car into Vessels and the other agent if necessary in order to stop them because like you don't have radios, to like other than the one that's in Robert's car. Like it's not like they can easily just like call each other and say where they are. So they're just like ram your car into them, stop them, whatever you have to do. But before that happened, Vessels found the Lincoln. So he just like jumped out of Elliot's car and into the backseat of the Lincoln with Robert. And then the agent took off in Elliot's car. So Vessels was able to help Robert navigate to where he thought the drop was supposed to be. So he had found on the map that there was another similar sounding road name that he thought is what the kidnappers actually meant. And like, that's why Robert was having trouble finding it because they said like Bay something way and it was like Bay Road something. And, it was very similar that he's like, okay, I found this that matches the other descriptions that I think is what they actually meant. So they finally dropped the suitcase around 4:30 or 4:35, but they never saw the light that was mentioned in the ransom note. So Robert's kind of like, I'm not quite sure if that was right. I don't know. So back at the Mackle house, the kidnapper called and said that they missed the time window. And Frank Mackle answered the phone and he's like, no, like my brother left with the money. Like I saw him, like he's on the way. And the kidnapper is like, I mean, I didn't see him, but I'll go back and look again. And he also said to tell Robert that there wasn't a light on the box that they were supposed to drop it at anymore. So he's like, let him know the light's gone now. And Frank said the kidnapper was just like calm and almost sounded polite. Like they're just like having a business interaction.
Sorry, buddy. I'll go check again. I didn't mean to miss it.
Oh, sorry, I missed him. Like, I'll go back. Okay. Kind of weird. So at daybreak, Vessels and Inspector Schroeder went back to the site to see if the money was still there, and it was gone. So they're obviously very happy because they're like, okay, like the kidnappers have the money. Now we just have to wait the 12 hours. We'll see Barbara. It's going to be okay. However, they then heard on the police radio that there had been a shootout and the money in the suitcase had been recovered by the Miami police.
So the fucking Miami police, man.
We'll learn a lot more about the Miami police in part 2 because that's where we are stopping today. You guys thought like we're gonna wrap this up in one part. You're like, okay, we dropped the money, we getting Barbara. We got a whole other part 2 that's going to be even longer than this one. So yeah, but it's worth it, guys. It is worth sticking around for. Like,
yeah, because we got to get back onto what Barbara's experiencing because we told you that Barbara was put in that box and we've not talked about it since. So
Exactly. There is a lot more to come. And the end of the story, like things get wild. Like there is just a lot to this. So definitely want to stick around for part two. That being said, Courtney, what is your perk of the week?
So, my perk of the week is that I have been reading the series A Court of Thorn and Roses by Sarah J. Moss. Sorry, I don't know which one it is. And it's very, very good. I've really been enjoying it. I read the first two when I was at the beach, and they're pretty long. And so then I had a bunch of like holds come available, and I kind of got like delayed. But then I read the next book, 3, and I was complaining because I was like, why is this fourth book so small? Well, it's apparently a 3.5. Like it's a half book. So it makes more sense now. But now I have one more left, and I cannot wait to read it.
Nice.
Because I love this series so far. So now I'm going to have to start reading all her other books too, because she has like 70 different series. So
oh wow,
here
I didn't realize
here we
that
go.
she
We're
had
just
that many.
Yeah, because she has the Crescent City ones, and then there's like it's like Thorn of Glass. One of those series that has like a bunch of books, but
I've only
basically
heard of
people on
that one.
Yeah, basically people on Book Talk joke about like, oh, me getting someone addicted to like this series that then turns into like 7 more series and like 50, like, you know what I mean? Like you just get in this, like, I don't know if they're all like semi-connected or not, but I'll let you know because I'll get there eventually. But
like this is all I'm reading for the rest of my life now. It's just this one author's books.
And I haven't really read fantasy in like a really long time. I feel like I went through a phase where I read a lot of like dystopian novels, which I know aren't the same as fantasy, but like similar vibes. And I kind of got burnt out because after Hunger Games, everyone tried to do the same thing, kind of thing. But I'm really, really loving this series, so
nice.
Can't wait to
I'm
finish
excited
it.
to read it eventually.
Yes, you definitely should, because I mean it's like 700 pages, but like you like fly through it because you're just like, I need to read it. So
you're like sucked into it.
So that is my perk of the week. Jacqueline, what is your perk of the week?
Before I say my perk of the week, I just also wanted to add, I think I mentioned this like last week or maybe it was 2 weeks ago, that the book Remarkably Bright Creatures became available, and I was like so excited because I've been wanting to read it, but I had to push it back because I was reading this book for this episode and also another book. And so I've been hoping that it would become available before our trip to CrimeCon so I could read it on the plane, and it became available today. So I'm very happy about that.
Very nice.
But my other perk of the week, I think I mentioned like 2 months ago about our washer flooding incident that, destroyed our office and everything. And finally, almost 2 months later, we have new floors as of yesterday in the office. So it isn't half concrete anymore, which is great. And I have floor under my laundry room, so I'm not like getting splinters in my feet from the subfloor every time I try to go in the laundry room to do laundry. And it's but I finally have floor, so I'm very happy. And they tried to match it as best they could to what we currently had. And what we got is, I wouldn't say significantly different, but like it's definitely different, but we actually like it better. So I'm really happy about that. So
so did they replace like all the floors in the whole office just to like make it match, basically?
Yes. Yeah. So basically, like, because the water was, quote, contaminated because there was mold underneath where the water came out.
Everything had to be.
Exactly. Yeah. So
gotcha.
Yeah, so that's done. And then tomorrow, they're going to come out to replace the baseboards and then replace the insulation from the crawl space where the water leaked down. So we should, hopefully tomorrow, be completely finished with this whole ordeal. But I'm very happy about my new floors.
Nice. That's great to hear.
Yes. Very exciting stuff. So if you want to tell us about the books you're reading, as always, thank you, Jennifer, for updating us on your Jodi Picoult journey over there. And tell us about your floors. Tell us about what else did we even talk about at the beginning of this episode? It was so long ago, I don't even know. So, tell us all the things on all the places, which is in our show notes. And what else do we talk about? Patreon.com/caffeinated crimes, which hopefully at the point you're hearing this week, we'll have some stuff about CrimeCon coming out on Patreon. So if you guys want some deeper, we'll talk about it in next week's episode when we do our little intro. But if you guys want like the deep dive, like the real time, like recording from CrimeCon, here we go. Patreon.com/caffeinated crimes, and we'll have that fun stuff coming out later this week for you.
Yes. And if you could give us 5 stars on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen, give us a thumbs up, subscribe on YouTube, just wherever you listen. If you could just show us a little bit of love, that would be greatly appreciated. But in the meantime, go have a cup of coffee.
And don't commit a crime.